Welcome to another episode of The Disruptors, where we're arming you with the tools you need to innovate within the physical therapy space by highlighting those who have come before you. I'm your host, Stephen Cohen. Now, let's get into it. Welcome back to the Disruptors podcast. I am so excited to have Rafi Salazar on with us today. And a brief intro on Rafi. His career trajectory has included 12 plus years of experience in healthcare management, clinical operations, programmatic development, marketing, and business development. He even spent some time as an assistant professor in a graduate program of occupational therapy and has served on numerous boards and regulatory committees. He is the host of the Better Outcomes show, and he's also the author of the book, Better Outcomes, A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare. Today, Rafi helps healthcare clinics, organizations, and healthcare technology startups develop effective patient engagement and positioning strategies through his consulting work. He also leverages his experience as a professor and academic to speak and train on the topics around humanizing the healthcare experience, healthcare technology, and innovation. In addition, Rafi also owns and operates ProActive Rehabilitation and Wellness, a multidisciplinary outpatient clinic treating patients with musculoskeletal pain, and one that I've been lucky enough to visit in person in wonderful Augusta, Georgia, which is about to get much busier here.
Yes, absolutely.
Without too much longer. So with that, Rafi, thank you. I'm excited to have you. And if you don't mind, I say we jump right into it.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. I like to start from the beginning, right?
Okay.
And go back to more of your why that you at least got into the therapy world. So let's start there and the background of why you got into it. And if you could mix in a little bit of how, that wouldn't be too terrible either.
Sure. Yeah. So growing up, I was kind of split in the career path. My dad is an engineer and he wanted one of his kids to be like a chemical engineer or something like that. I was pretty good at science and math, figured, that seemed like a decent, you can make money as an engineer, right? My grandfather, on the other hand, was a vascular surgeon, and I got to spend some time with him in the summers when I was young, 10, 11, 12, and really thought, man, there's something cool about like having a relationship. He ran his own small private vascular surgery practice in Ohio, and the people that came in like knew, hey, Dr. Suarez, and they had this conversation, how are the kids going? Like he saw these people over a period of time, and he built like real relationships with them. And I thought that was super, super cool. And as I was growing up, I kind of realized like, maybe I'm sure people that are in engineering, don't get mad at me, engineers, like I'm sure they have those kind of relationships with their clients in some circles, but I just did not like the idea of sitting like at a cubicle crunching numbers on an Excel sheet all day. I wanted to do something with people. So I thought, being young and not lacking any confidence, I was like, well, my grandfather's a vascular surgeon. Maybe I'll just go and like be a neurosurgeon. Like that can't be too much more difficult, right? And talking with my grandfather about it, he was like, well, healthcare is changing. If you really want work-life balance, getting your MD is probably not the way to go. At that point in time, he was like getting ready to wind down his practice. And a lot of that, the drive behind that was just because of regulatory burden, and he couldn't treat the way he wanted to treat, right? So it got me thinking, like the summer before my senior year, like leading up to that in high school, I was like, okay, want to go in healthcare, don't want to go in medicine because it sounds like that's just a recipe for burnout. And just so happened that I went fishing down to the lovely Savannah River right here behind the waterworks in Augusta, Georgia. Slipped and fell in a bottle, not my bottle, just a bottle that somebody had left in the river, and lacerated my flexor tendon in my left hand and my thumb, and ended up landing myself in an OT clinic, in a hand clinic for 3 times a week for the balance of the summer before my senior year in high school, and then a little bit into that first part of that school year. And I was like, man, this is cool. This is really, really cool. And it kind of set me on the path of, okay, I want to do hand therapy. And that's kind of what got me into the therapy world. From there, I kind of just connected with the therapist that worked with me when I was done, when I had graduated therapy and was off in the world. I reached back out to her and said, hey, I'm thinking about going into occupational therapy as a career field. Would you mind, me shadowing you? And I was able to get in and do a little bit of everything, see some of the outpatient, see some of the inpatient, kind of see some of the PTs do their thing, see some of the OTs do their thing. And the rest is history. Kind of got into the program, and at MCG, well, it was MCG, now it's Augusta University, in the OT department. Graduated in 2012 and have been running ever since.
I want to touch on a couple of things because there's a lot of nuggets in there, but a couple in particular. So you proactively asked your treating OT if you could shadow her.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And she was fine with it, right? She probably was kind of honored, right?
Yeah, she was. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, yeah, sure, of course, right? You can do that. There's a stigma around people thinking that the others don't want to help them, right? It's so wrong in so many cases, right? Like, sure, does it happen? Yes, of course. There are people that are having bad days everywhere, but I want to highlight that it was just as simple as you having the courage to ask, right?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, my dad always said this multiple times. He was like, you always ask. The worst thing they say is no, and then you're in the same position that you were in now. Like, nothing has changed.
Except for now you don't have to put a bunch of mind space, right, towards what could happen. Like, well, I already know what the outcome is, so now I can move forward, right?
Exactly.
That's it. I appreciate that, and then also on your grandfather and those real relationships that you get, that you saw get built, and yeah, I think for all the engineers out there, and I guess I'm about to lump in consultants. I'd say there were a lot of those relationships that were very surface level, and it kind of started with the project and ended with the project, and maybe you get a like on LinkedIn every 6 months, right? And then that's about it, and that's fine. Like that there's nothing wrong with that. But when I see when I think of my relationship with my physical therapist that I've had over the course of the last 2-3 decades, it's very different, right? You're with them one-on-one, right? And with a lot of time, it's just you and another human, right? And you're vulnerable as a patient. It's very, very different. So I love that you highlighted those, among other things, the desire for real relationships and how you just ask and look what happened afterwards, right? And my typical next question is the why behind PT, and you covered that as well, right? With the flexor tendon and that injury. I don't know if you want to add any more to that, or if you just want to continue rolling.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really liked the fact that it was, one of the things that even my grandfather said was a limitation in his work as a surgeon was like, he saw people, for like an assessment, maybe for pre-op, then he'd see him immediately post-operative, and then like 3 or 4 months later. So my grandfather was great at making the most out of that time and trying to build a real relationship. But when you're in a PT clinic, 2 times a week for like 12 weeks, it's much more intense. Like you're seeing somebody almost every other day. The relationship gets very deep very quickly. And I kind of was drawn to that.
And go ahead. We'll take a sidebar for a little bit of a tangent. That's really the only place in healthcare that happens, right? Yeah. Like it's therapy. That's it. Now, if you look at therapy like the broadest sense, right? Looking at both the mental and physical side, then that definitely encapsulates the only interactions that are both near term in terms of cadence, and even in a single visit is more than 20 minutes, unless you're in like a direct primary care, like some other cash pay model. It doesn't happen. I think it's really special, and why I love what we do, and trying to help those that are doing the hard work of creating those relationships. Like, it's not just a pure, like, all right, come in, all right, stick you with a needle and I'm out, and not to degrade
come back in 6 months or whatever.
Yeah, degrade any other practices. But I mean, you have both the challenge and the opportunity of behavior change.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's tough. That's tough. There's billions of dollars been invested into diet and exercise and all those other things, right? If not tens, maybe it's even hundreds of billions now, right? Into companies that are trying to impact that, and try to do that every single day. I just think it's really cool. And it's why I love working with this group. And maybe that leads us a little bit into talking about, your why behind what you're doing now. So, right, you're not only treating, but you're also helping health tech companies. You're advising others. You're teaching. Right, you've got just a couple irons in the fire. As well as a very full van, right? And family to take care of. So, walk me through that transition, right? And both I definitely want to talk about the how you did it, but I'd love to even know the why, right? Where's the energy come from, and then where are you putting that energy towards?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess it all started back when I was one of my first jobs was like the dream job for an outpatient clinician. And it was, well, maybe it's a dream job, depending on your point of view. It was in an outpatient specialty rehab clinic for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And, which I consider the best job in the world for a staff clinician, because you didn't have to worry about insurance. You were dealing with the federal government, which is never fun, but the patients, you want to talk about building relationships with patients. It was awesome. The VA is very unique in that they are, for the most part, the majority of the people that we saw, like, received all their care at the VA. So there was like this community within the community in the VA. It was just a unique experience. And then because you don't have to worry about insurance, and because the VA puts a lot of money, rightly so, in innovation and trying to get, the best care for those who served us, you get the access to do super cool things. Like, I was doing telehealth back in 2012. 2013 is when I started there. So 2013, 2014, we were doing telehealth with the C-Box, which was the community-based outpatient centers, before it was like a billable cool thing. It was just one of those, we had veterans that lived, I'm in Augusta, we had a C-Box in Athens, which is a couple hours away, and all they had there was primary care. So it just made sense. Like, why don't we just screen these people before they have to drive in for 2.5 hours for an OT eval or something like that? So we were doing telehealth, consultations, 12 years ago. It was super, super cool. So there was that aspect. One of the big things that I became very aware of while I was there. 2013 is when I said I started. I think around 2014 is when the fit hit the shan over at the VA, and it started with the Phoenix VA. I don't remember if you remember this in the news, but there's a big scandal. It broke in the Phoenix VA first, and then they realized that it was more of a systemic issue across the entire Department of Veterans Affairs, and it really revolved around scheduling. There were veterans that were getting put on like paper wait lists, quote unquote, and then never getting called back for appointments. It was a huge, huge deal. And as someone who was there, it was a huge deal for the veterans who were coming in, because they were very disgruntled, to say the least. They really just didn't trust the VA. They didn't trust that the VA had their best intentions at heart. And that carried on to not just like the VA, but it was like, you're part of the VA. I don't trust you. Right. So there was that aspect. And then the other aspect was like, people were just leaving, good employees, good clinicians, people with a lot of experience didn't want to be tied up in that, and they left. So about that time, 2014-ish, late 2014, early 2015, I had been bumped into, I can't remember what they called it, like senior executive leadership development or something like that. They put us through a bunch of trainings and things like that. one of the things that that was kind of like a last ditch effort almost, that they wanted our group, our cohort of like leaders in development to roll out at the VA, was something called relationship-based care. And the entire idea was like, if the work culture sucks, the care is going to suck, the patients are going to leave, right? And it's not going to be good for anybody. So the whole idea is we're going to build a strong relationship within the treatment team, and that will carry over to the way that we communicate with veterans and their families. And it's going to make sure that, you know, veterans not only trust the care that the advice and the recommendations that are being given, but that they're going to be more likely to show up and all of that. So I was very fortunate to be able to do that, and really kind of spearhead leading that, rolling that out in a couple of the units within RVA here in Augusta. And it was not long after that we started rolling that out that we saw some real improvements, and the entrepreneurial little, you know, spaz in my brain decided like this has a lot of application outside of like a federal government health system that's floundering and failing, right? Like the idea of relationships being leveraged to like improve business metrics, which sounds really like callous when you say it, but had a lot of applicability to the private healthcare market. And I could see that people would be willing to pay for that. Right. So about the time that we were done rolling that out, and I had kind of seen and documented along the way what was working, what wasn't working, some of the things that I saw in the program that we were putting out, which was at the time a trademark program. And I can't remember who put it on. It was some big consulting firm that put it on for them. I had like put down some things on paper that I kind of thought could have been done better, and probably could have been done differently, specific for rehab, because we're different than, like we just said, ortho or another specialty where there's like longer periods of time in between care, or inpatient where it's like super intense for like 3 or 4 days and then you're discharge planning. Yep. Rehab was a little different. So I decided what I was going to do is I was going to basically do a course. I was going to make it a CEU course, and I was going to call it something like relationship-based rehabilitation. And it was all going to be about leveraging relationships to improve no-show rates and cancellation rates and patient engagement and all of that. So built Rehab U on the side during in my evening hours when I was at the VA. And then about that time, like a couple of years go by, building this course, thinking about what's the next steps. I was part of this leadership development thing was like, okay, we're going to prepare you when at the end of this 2 years, whatever, you're going to have the skills. We're going to have you qualified to take, you know, a jump in your series. Everything in the federal government is like your pay scales and your GS scale or whatever, which was attractive to me because I was trying to provide for my family, right? And so 2016-ish, 2017-ish rolls around, finish the program. I'm like, okay, I'm going to become like a manager here at the VA. I'm going to really be able to affect change. And got passed over for a job that I was clearly more qualified for than the person who got the job. And when I was talking to part of this leadership development series, was like, okay, we're going to give you a mentor. So I was talking to my mentor about it, and I was like, this is not right. You know, like obviously I know I have more skills. I've demonstrated more skills and competence than this other individual. And they said, well, you know, they've been here for 17 years. You've only been here for, 3 or 4 years. Don't worry about it. And then this person said,
and you worried about it. And you
the kicker was, part of me was like, well, that's not right. That shouldn't happen. So I was already thinking in the back of my mind, like, well, then I'm going to go find a place that values what I have to bring to the table. But the kicker was, on the way out the door, the guy was like, well, you're a Hispanic male. And I said, yeah. So, and he said, give enough time, we'll give you something. And I was like, I'm not going to be an affirmative action case for anybody. So I left his office with like the clear intention of like, I'm just going to go apply to anywhere and everywhere that's going to take what I've got to offer. And my dad, being the super innovative guy that he is, like he got me on LinkedIn. I was not on LinkedIn before my dad was on LinkedIn. He was like, you need to get on LinkedIn and you will get a job from there. And I was like, sure, whatever. So I hopped on LinkedIn, and like within 2 weeks, a connection had reached out to me and said, hey, we're looking for an occupational therapist in Augusta, Georgia, who's got some of the skills that you've got. I had done some training in like project management, not Lean Six Sigma. I didn't go get all like a black belt, but I did some of the training and kind of understood some of the principles, some policy analytics. And they said, we're doing this project with the state of Georgia with the Department of Behavioral Health, and we need an OT consultant. Would you be interested? And I said, sure. Like, let's have a conversation. So all via LinkedIn messaging. One thing led to another. Met the director of the project at a Starbucks here in Augusta. He basically pitched me on this idea of they were doing a lot of programmatic work for the Department of Behavioral Health, and was I interested? I said, sure. I said, I guess it depends on how much the pay is, how long the job is, because it's consulting, and the big thing about consultants is like the running joke is like a consultant is someone always in between jobs, right? Like we're always moving from project to project. And I said, well, how long? He said, well, it's 6 months, and the pay was like, I don't know, like 130 grand. It was going to be like more than I would make in 2 years at the VA. And I was like, done and done. Like, you don't have to tell me anymore. So, signed the contract, put my 2 weeks in at the VA and left. And that experience was freaking awesome. It was supposed to be a 6-month contract, ended up being like 3 years, but it exposed me to like higher level, really like advisory work. Like I was briefing people from the governor's office about the project that we were doing and where we were at and the steps we were putting in place, how we were doing some knowledge translation. And it really opened my eyes to like the impact that you can have at that level. Even as a manager at the VA, the most I could have done is affect change for that clinic maybe, or that department, which would granted have been a couple hundred patients, maybe 1,000 patients in a year. I mean, when I was doing this consulting project for the Department of Behavioral Health, like I was writing policies on case management and things like that were affecting literally tens of thousands of people. So I really, really liked that. And I mean, obviously like financially it was a good move too. And it was at that point where I started really putting the pieces together with Rehab U and what I was doing. I was like, this is like, a course is nice, but really being able to impact systems is really what I want. And like big companies, big healthcare systems aren't buying a course from like Rafi Salazar on the internet, like they're just not doing that. So I pivoted the work that I was doing to like patient engagement strategy for healthcare organizations. And, one thing has led to another that kind of moved into like healthcare tech and stuff. But that's really kind of what made me shift from like staff clinician to consultant. And that kind of brought me to at least the consulting leg of the career. I feel like I just talked a lot. Sorry about that.
No, that's perfect. I honestly, I think it's, again, for what we're trying to accomplish with this podcast, right? It's like, it's not always perfect. And when one door shuts, another one opens, right? Like there's actually a lot that you covered there. When one door shuts, another one opens, right? And finding the silver lining to it. This maybe, I think the LinkedIn in particular, I wrote that down, right? Like, I love getting the LinkedIn connection request from a PT that like I'm number 46. I'm like, man, like you need to get those numbers up. You should have more than 46 connections. And I don't know if we've talked about this. My wife's a nurse practitioner, and she maybe has like 50 or 60. And like, you'd be surprised like how many opportunities can come through especially LinkedIn for that. I mean,
well, and they say, like most people get jobs now, like the referrals are not from like your close circle of friends. It's like those second and third degrees of connection that you have. Like, oh, my buddy knows somebody across town that's looking for this. So even if you're looking for like another PT job, it benefits you to have just a ton of people in that network that are maybe not even people that you talk to weekly or regularly, but they're like friends of friends or connections of connections, because those weak ties is where a lot of opportunities happen.
Completely agree, right? And we've seen that on business development or even on hiring, right? Like our chief outcomes officer was a LinkedIn connection of a LinkedIn connection, like, and they had a strong relationship. And this, I talked to this guy, I was like, oh, you should meet Amanda. And like, okay, let's do it. And a few years later, she was an advisor for a while, then joined. But that's how that happened. So I think you're absolutely right. And some advice immediate tactical advice is grow your LinkedIn network. You don't have to post every day, right? You don't have to do any of that. Just simply get the people that are actually in your network in your LinkedIn network. And so that way, if you ever need it or can ever help someone else, it's there and it's frictionless, right? Instead of trying to build it from scratch, if heaven forbid something happens and you get laid
last thing
off.
you want to do is be like, oh, I need a job. Time to start digging,
Yeah, time to do this LinkedIn thing. Like, no, set the stage beforehand. And when you're talking about briefing the governor's staff and going through that, I'd have to imagine your executive communication, right, and those skills, which are so incredibly important, right, as you know. Do you mind going into maybe even like a couple examples? So maybe one thing that was like a really nice win for you, like, oh, like this is like now how I do executive communication every time, and maybe even a hard lesson with that. Because I think a lot of people listening, right? Hey, how do I talk to my boss about this? How do I think about I want to get this program rolled out now? How do I get someone 4 or 5 levels up to get excited about this and green light it? So I think if there's anything you can spare, both good, a hard-earned lesson and a nice win, if you could share a couple examples, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think, well, they're linked. So hard lesson first, and then how I do things now. So it's very easy. And I think Chip and Dan Heath write about this a little bit in one of their books. Maybe it's Made to Stick or Switch or something like that. Made to Stick or Switch. I've read like almost every book that those two have written together. It's awesome. But in one of those books,
Upstream?
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
it's a good one. Yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole of Chip and Dan Heath. I think it was Made to Stick. He talks about the curse of knowledge and how a lot of times people that have technical expertise can almost not remember what it's like to not know what you know, right? Like that's just, it sounds really douchey to say like, I'm so smart, I forget what it's like not to know what I know. But especially if you're communicating with people that are outside of your area of expertise, like at executive meetings, you're dealing with like a marketing officer, a business development officer, or somebody that like maybe in finance that really looks at rehab as just some numbers on a spreadsheet and what it means for the bottom line. Like all the technical stuff that they don't know any of it. So they're looking at, you have to realize that when you're having that communication or giving that presentation or making a pitch or whatever it is, y'all are coming to it from two very different vantage points. So you need to be able to tailor what you're communicating to that person. Essentially it's positioning. But so one of the like early fails is we were doing something. It was a project about the way the state was going to manage case management through support coordination for the integrated clinical support team, which is a bunch of fancy stuff. Basically, what we were trying to do is streamline the way cases were managed from kind of the Medicaid waiver system here in Georgia for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I wrote this brief out. And technically it was sound. Clinically, it was sound. It was 28 pages. It was like the state is still using it to my knowledge. Last time I checked with somebody as a framework for what's going on with case management. So technically sound, it was awesome. Put it together, and I basically translated that onto like a PowerPoint. And about 2 minutes in, they were like glazed over eyes, and people were like, like I was talking with somebody that they were managing the budget for this department or this program, and like they didn't really care about the clinical. I mean, they did care about the clinical outcomes, but it wasn't pertinent to their job. They wanted to make sure that like this was not going to bankrupt the department, or they were going to not lose anything on this investment, or what did this mean for provider recruitment and retention within the state. So what I do now as a result of that experience, they were very gracious. They're like, we can tell you're a very smart guy and you know what you're talking about, but this is really what we care about. And they like gave me bullet points. Like, we want to know this stat. We want to know this outcome. We want to know boom, 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 boom. And basically what I do now is I like look at like who's the stakeholder, who's the audience, what is truly valuable to them, because especially in healthcare, you've got 4 different stakeholders, right? You've got the payer, the provider, the policymaker, and the patient. And depending on who you're talking to, and really who you're talking to within each of those organizations, there's going to be something that person is really looking for. So it does not help to like lay out the very detailed plan if that person isn't going to be directly implementing it, right? Like that presentation that I did at the beginning would have been great if I was sitting down with like all the case managers and case managers to talk about how we were going to streamline case management. It was not good for the executive office who's having to make a decision about how many case managers are we going to need to hire, how long should somebody be under case management, like what is the process for onboarding, offboarding, like what kind of budgetary allocations should we put? Like the presentation was totally not geared towards that. It was geared towards a different audience. So now what you need to do is really identify that audience, and then really look at from which angle they're viewing the situation, the problem, and then tailoring your message, if you would, to really answer the questions that are most pertinent to them. If they're worried about budget, you want to like the leading line should be like, this is going to add to the bottom line, or this is going to, save expenses, or whatever it is. Like you want to touch those budgetary things right off the bat, and then kind of explain it after that, because then you're going to have them looped in. You're going to want them to know that this is pertinent to them.
I love that. There's a Japanese term called nimawashi, which is the art of getting buy-in from the different members prior to the meeting. And so just like a yes and, right? So not only think about what, those the vantage points and what's going to be important to them, but go ahead and try to get at least some buy-in as much as you can prior, right? Because it's just going to make it that much easier for when you get in the meeting, and then it's just kind of not quite a formality, right? Because anything can happen and you want to be prepared. But if you can make it something, and I love using this phrase, and I wish I remember where I got it from, because there's almost no way I made it up. But turning it from something you have to win to something you just have to not lose.
Yeah.
Like those are 2 very, very different things. And so that, and in one of those is way more successful than the other, and a lot less stress. And so by doing what you're talking about, right, you can turn a situation from, oh man, I got to pitch to win, versus I have to pitch to not lose. And then because we already have so much momentum going in our favor.
Yeah. As much as you can change it from like a binary decision between yes and no to like maybe there are options, or maybe there's something like, okay, you want to shift like cognitively or psychologically, you want your audience to stop thinking about yes and no's versus, like which option is best, or which action should we take, like which is the better option, because it's going to yield a lot more fruitful discussion, but then it's also going to like decrease the odds of you getting just denied, right?
Just flat no, right?
Exactly.
The worst outcome, and it minimizes those chances. Okay,
Thank you for listening to this episode. This would not be possible without the sponsorship of Sarah Health. Sarah is the relationship operating system for physical therapy practices, driving better patient outcomes, improved arrival rate, and improved financial margins. If you'd like to learn more, check them out at sarahealth.com, sarahealth.com. And if you'd be interested in advertising with us and helping us produce even more great stories, please let us know at steven@sarahealth.com. Now, back to the episode.
I want to shift a little bit.
Sure.
And go into a couple of your proudest achievements. So I love asking this. So, one that's within therapy, right, within the career, and then one that's outside. So let's start within the career. What would you say if, like, man, I'm darn proud of that moment, of that achievement?
Yeah, I think, I've been blessed to have just a pretty wide ranging career. So I've got like things on the clinical side. I still treat it a day a week. And then things like on the business side of things. I think the biggest one from like a personal, like patient relationship thing is when I was leaving the VA, I put my 2 weeks in and I was on the way out the door, and unbeknownst to me, there's, I kind of knew like the veterans have their groups and they're meeting about their groups and all that kind of stuff. And they're talking about care at this VA versus that VA and that clinic versus this clinic. I'm sitting down. It's like probably my last week. I'm typing notes and my computer like faced a wall. It was, the door was behind me and there was a knock on the door and I turned around. It was this patient that I had seen maybe, a year and a half before, or it had been a while. He was not a patient of mine currently. And I was like, hey man, how's it going? He said, hey, I heard through the grapevine that this is your last week at the VA. And I was like, wow, word spreads fast. I said, yeah. I said, there was another opportunity and it just made sense for me to take it. And he like kind of stopped a little bit, like him-hawed around a little bit and then said, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but in our first meeting, when we first had an appointment together, you asked me a question about it was basically the Dan Sullivan question, like it's 3 years from now, we're having a beer, we're having coffee and you're happy. What's made you happy? And then you kind of dive in from there. And this guy had some chronic pain issues. He was, he had like left, he was separated from his wife. He was drinking a good bit. He was estranged from his family. So he was in there for like chronic shoulder pain or something like that. And we like get into this discussion around his drinking and his substance abuse and like his living situation. And I felt like I didn't do anything super like novel or amazing. All I really did was I helped him with his shoulder and then I connected him with other people at the VA, right? I connected him with a social worker, connected him with a counselor for the substance abuse program. And that's all I felt like I really did. In fact, I want to say like I only saw him 5 or 6 times. He did not live close to Augusta. He was, as far as I was concerned, like he was doing his exercise at home. He was getting better. And that's kind of what we talked about. I mean, at the very beginning, we had talked about like this huge life shift. And I told him like, listen, I'm not really equipped to do this, but I can get you the reason. I can connect you with the people that can help you. Right. So anyways, that's this guy. So he's back there now. He said, well, a year and a half ago when we first met and we had this appointment for the shoulder pain and we kind of dove into all my personal stuff. I don't know if I ever told you this, but you like that appointment shifted the course of my life. I just want you to know, like, I'm going back to church now. I stopped drinking. I've been sober for like 12 months or whatever. I'm still working on stuff with my counselor. My wife and I are, we're in couples counseling now, and it's going to be a long road, but hopefully we're going to be able to mend things together. And he was super, super like talking about like big impact. I was like, holy smokes. Like, and he said like, you might not even notice this and you might not even been like attempting to do this, but just asking the question and taking the time to listen really gave me hope that there was the possibility for like recovery, for normalcy down the line. And that's like from a clinical standpoint. I mean, this is, 7 years ago. I still think about that interaction as like one of the big wins. And it's not one that like no one hears about it. It's not on the website. I don't get a plaque for it. But like I made like just being a good therapist in my mind, like a good therapist, a caring person, had this real impact on a patient's life. And even if every single patient, obviously not every single patient that you see is you're going to have that kind of an impact, but just the fact that it's happened once in my career means that it's possible, and that really keeps me going some days when it gets hard. It's like, man, we still have the opportunity to make those kind of impacts. Right. So on the clinical side, that's definitely that interaction with that patient.
Oh, that's an amazing story. That's an amazing story. And you know what frustrated may not be the right word, but I'm so glad he came back and said that, right? How many stories do you think are out there like that?
Oh, yeah.
Never hear.
Exactly.
Right? Gosh, I know we've seen on a smaller scale, right? We've seen a couple of really cool interactions of people either, during care, sending a really cool message that then the practice owner can highlight. Like one of our favorites that I like to use is The patient responded back to how's your pain on a scale of 0 to 10 with 2 because Lucy, you're a genius. And of course, it flagged our system because non-standard response. And then this was way back in the day when we didn't have as much automation as we do now. And we ended up sending it to the owners of the clinic. Like, hey, this was pretty cool. And then they sent it out to everybody, right? Of like, holy cow, like this is awesome that we even get to recognize this, because it probably happens every day, all day, and it just goes into the ether, right? Or the patient you're talking about is now able to talk to his wife about it. Like, gosh, like, man, if it wasn't for like, I don't know where I'd be right now. Like, well, that'd be cool to hear about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
it probably does happen a lot. You know, like how many times you've been sitting around with your friends or something like that, and somebody's about to go to a doctor's appointment, and they're like, "Oh, you need to go to this doctor because they're amazing," or "You need to go to this PT because they helped me with X, Y, Z." Like, I think it happens a lot. We just never hear about it. You know,
you never do. And yeah, I think that, like, if you could close the loop on that in healthcare, I think you'd see it's not the silver bullet to burn out, right? But I think if you just knew that, if you got that positive feedback loop, right, of, hey, this worked for me, thank you. Like, oh, okay, well, now today seems better after that. So shifting into, let's take it outside of PT, right? I mean, you can be as cheesy as you want to with this, outside of therapy. Feel free. We have had people, earlier guests cite their kids. So, it's all is fair play. So yeah, what's your outside of PT proudest achievement?
Yeah, I would think outside of PT would probably be convincing my wife to marry me, because I had no shot in hell. And she said yes. So 11 years, 6 kids. It's been a blast. Great ride.
Well, congratulations on getting over the decade mark. I'm trailing you on that, but hope to get there here in the next couple of years. And I'm not going to follow you on the 6-kid journey. I think we're probably somewhere between half to a third of that is our journey. But I was one of 4 growing up, and it was always fun. It was always fun. So
it's never a dull moment at the house, right?
No. Silence is not a thing, right? At least outside of very minimal parts of time. So to wrap up, I want to ask my favorite question, which is our magic wand question. So if you could wave a magic wand and one thing gets fixed in therapy, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think it would be, I would want to change the focus of the entire industry as it relates to like business models and reimbursement and all that. Like, we see it. I don't know if you see it. I see it every time I log in LinkedIn or Facebook or one of these social media platforms, like somebody complaining about another cut of an insurance, Medicare is cutting 2%, or, UHC is only paying X dollars a day, or, but it's all focused on like this archaic fee for service way of monetizing healthcare. Like, instead of looking for ways to double down on a broken system. I wrote about this in the book, Better Outcomes: A Guide to Humanizing Healthcare. Like, there's big problems with the way we pay for healthcare these days, in that it incentivizes really crappy, expensive care. I think if I could wave a wand, it would just be to shift everybody's brain from like, how do we double down on this broken model and get paid more for it, to, okay, how can we innovate in the way that we either deliver, sell, or get paid for our services? Like the way and the future for PT and OT is really going to be through leveraging alternative revenue models, whether it be through value-based care, remote care, hybrid care in general, as a philosophy of delivering care. But like I said, it seems that we're willing to die on this hill of fee for service, like getting paid an extra $5 more an appointment or something like that, rather than just looking at different ways that we can monetize our expertise and the value that we really bring to the table as clinicians.
And we've been lucky enough through this this business has taken quite a set of twists and turns over the course of the last 7 years. And when we got started, we found our nice little niche with these PT groups that were on site at high risk employers, particularly firefighters.
Yeah.
And they had these lump sum arrangements where it was really like a managed care contract for that group on a per employee per month, right? Like it was the classic PEPM model for PEPM model. And it was cool to see it actually happen to a strictly a on-site PT group that focused on it, right? And that then created a bunch of incentives where okay, could we bring in some athletic trainers to a certain portion of this as clinically appropriate, right? And well, now if we're just paid a lump sum, well, if we prevent injuries, then we don't have to treat as much, and then that's cheaper. Like you can see the wheels turn, and so it just shifted the entire thought process of let's not in kind of like an ironic way, right? Let's not reward the firefighting, but let's reward the person putting in the smoke alarm. And so that's they saw a bunch of success there, and in one of them in particular, I think they're in at least 10 or 12 of the biggest apartments in the U.S. And it makes sense. And their whole idea, which I think back to making this real for folks, was they just thought, okay, we're two pro athletes. We know what it's like to get treated like a pro athlete. Let's try to get as close as we can to treating, as they call them, tactical athletes like pro athletes. And then let's just see if the market buys it. And sure enough, it did, right? For all sorts of reasons that I'm sure you can assume. And I appreciate what you've done, because even though I'm sure it was a winding road at times, right? Like it looks sequential now, and a series of, and then I expanded my boundaries, and just kept doing that over and over. And even though it might be a listener might look at that and say, oh, well, if I look at he was in the VA and now he's running his own podcast, got his own book, like all this stuff, like, man, that seems like it's a big jump. But I appreciate you walking me through your timeline and story, because to me it feels like, yes, did it take a lot of hard work? Absolutely. Did it take some risk? Yes, absolutely. Right. And did it take getting on LinkedIn? Yes, which everyone should do and be better at. But it feels so. It feels very like, I could do something similar. And I appreciate how you've made it real to me, and I hope that others feel similarly.
I think the big thing is there's no such thing as an overnight success. I mean, very rarely. I've been doing this 7-8 years now, so I did not start like that. I was like a guy with a Facebook account back in 2016, 2017 when I first started consulting. Is one thing leads to another, incremental progress over perfection, for sure.
I like that, progress over perfection, because if you wait for the perfect opportunity, the perfect time, if you wait, you're gonna be waiting a long time, because perfect never comes.
Exactly.
Right? Whether that's career, kids, everything else, the perfect time, it never comes. So with that, I like to give you, if you had 1 or 2 pieces of advice for folks, like, hey, if you're thinking about innovating, if you're treating right now and you want to try something new, whether that's outside of your current employer, within your current employer, right? Just to take that next step to go innovate on something. What are 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you would give to that person?
Yeah, I mean, this might be a little cliche, but it's kind of what I did. I think what you want to do is you want to find a Venn diagram is the cliche example, but you kind of want to find that intersection between maybe your skill set or your expertise or your passion, and then market need, because it doesn't make any sense to build something that people don't want, right? So I'd suggest looking at your domain area of expertise. If you want to do something clinical, or maybe you want to do something non-clinical, what skill set do you have to bring to bear in your chosen marketplace? Maybe it is the PT industry or something like that. Figure out how that expertise or that skill set or that service can provide specific value to the types of clients you want to serve or to work with. And then just start crafting offers. Pitch a few projects, kind of iterate, kind of go from there. The first patient engagement, like consulting project that I did outside of the VA was for I think she only had one. She was about to open up a second clinic. So she was a small private practice PT, about to open up her second practice and needed some cash flow issues. And I kind of like pitched her on this whole deal of like, this is what the idea is. And I did not try to make it sound super, super polished. And part of that is just my personality. Like I hate the salesy, markety, like feeling sleazy like a marketer. So I'm very real with people. I was like, hey, I was doing this at the VA. We saw some really good improvements. I'm looking to start some work in this area with private practices because I think that's where the lowest hanging fruit is for just ROI. And if it's something you're interested in, it's X number of dollars. And she said, sure. And, through that project, I realized, okay, like in my process, this worked at the VA. It doesn't work in private practice. This worked here. I probably want to do this a little differently or start somewhere. And I kind of built an entire service offering over on the backs of like 3 or 4 clients. And each time I was iterating and each time I was getting better, getting their feedback. And then the price obviously goes up as it gets better. And I was at the point at the height of this when I was doing the ultimate patient experience blueprint, which was like the thing that I was offering up until a couple of years ago. It was one of those things that was never a solid thing. It was a framework that got iterated on every time. Like every time you're doing something, you're adding to that bank of expertise that you get to bring to the next project. I think that's one of the big problems people have is like, they want to do this and they want to do that, or they're doing this project and that project. And there's no way to like tie them all together. Like you want everything you do. It doesn't necessarily need to be a straight line, but you always want to do some kind of project. The next project either should build on what you're currently doing or give you access to more tools and more expertise, more skills that you can bring onto the next project. Like you want to be thinking about it like that. Like we're developing a bank of expertise here, and how we get it, how we sell it, what we do might change, but the expertise itself, the point of view doesn't change. In fact, it's getting refined every time. And that's kind of what I've tried to do. Like now I'm working with healthcare technology companies. I'm not doing a whole lot of patient engagement work with private clinics, but I'm using a lot of the insights from that work over 7 years to now do work in a different area. I'm just applying it somewhere else. Right.
I like that a lot, and I think you would find it funny now how our onboarding looks in comparison to what it looked like months ago. But that's part of it, right? Like try it. That didn't quite, like that part really worked. Like, oh, that was really good. That one didn't. Let's keep iterating. And I like your Venn diagram, right? Finding out what you think your superpower is, right? And then market need. And I like that a lot. And I would even push further on the market need is it doesn't have to be a huge market. Like don't look at it and think, oh, well, there's only 500 PTs that do this one thing that I'm going to be able to help with. Like 500 people is a lot of people, right? Like that's a heck of a lot of people. And who knows what their treatment style looks like, right? Like it could be thousands easily. Don't be scared of small markets because they don't exist, in my opinion, right? You might look at private practice PT and OT like, oh, it's a small market, and healthcare is $4 trillion, and it's probably only 18 to 20 billion. It's like it's a lot of money. That's still a lot, right? There are I think it's 770,000 PTs, OTs, and if you include assistants as well in the U.S., right? Like quite a few, and okay, private practice may only be 450,000 of those, but it's a lot. That's a lot, right?
Well, and the reality is if like all the PE firms and the big, like Bain, McKinsey, those big groups are focusing on the big chunks, it means there's a lot of little chunks in that market that are not being served and its opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. In the venture world, a question which I abhor and get like almost check out, like we can just end this now. If anyone asks it, is, well, why wouldn't Google do this? It's like,
because they don't care about it.
Yeah. Because Google doesn't wake up, like, they don't get excited about anything that isn't, at least 1 billion, if not 20, right? So, I hate that question. Anyway, it's a tangent. So to tell you kind of read back the advice that I heard, right? Find your Venn diagram, right? Where does market need hit with your superpower and create somewhere where you can excel relatively quickly, right? And then the second, I think it's been a theme throughout their entire conversation today is, you say craft offers, just go try it, right? Go put yourself out there and go do that. I can be speaking for personal experience. The pain of a no is fleeting and can be used as learning. The pain of regret cannot. And so that's, while it might feel worse to get that no immediately, subsides pretty darn quickly. And once you've heard it like 100 times, and it's like, okay, cool, it's just data at this point. That's it. Rafi, thank you very much. I hope our listeners have gotten as much out, if not more, as I have out of this conversation. I appreciate you taking time away from your businesses, including your practice, to spend time with us, and want to say thank you very much for joining the Disruptors.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Disruptors. I hope that you were able to take 1 or 2 things away that you can apply immediately to your own innovation journey. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Cohen. This is sponsored by Sarah Health. Let's keep moving.